Roughly 4 hours south of Paris is a region of France framed by rolling hills and pastoral countryside. Generations have farmed these lands where fields seem endless, except for sporadic small villages lorded over by centuries-old church steeples. Nestled among these bucolic golden fields is one small community that carries visitors back to the true horrors of war. A silent hamlet is frozen in the year 1944. A small village where life came to a swift and horrific end one summer's day. Frenchman Robert Hebra is a survivor of one of the worst atrocities of World War II. On June 10, 1944, German soldiers arrived at the outskirts of his small 1,000-year-old French village of Oradour Sur Glane. They appeared with one purpose: to murder all who lived in this peaceful place and burn their hamlet to the ground. 18-year-old Robert Hebra was one of just 6 to escape the massacre of his village. He has spent his life telling his story to those who will listen.
We lived here. It was very small. There was a kitchen all the way in the back.
Where the window is?
Yes, the sink was over there.
Today, Robert's granddaughter, Agatha, preserves the story of Oradour for new generations. Just after the end of World War II in Europe, French leader Charles De Gaulle visited Oradour Sur Glane. De Gaulle ordered that the village be preserved forever in its destroyed state, so that the alarming visuals of what happened here would never fade away.
In 1945, General De Gaulle said, "Oradour must stay as it is. It is a symbol of your passion of France."
These are the faces of the 643 who were massacred. The local mechanic, a baker, a seamstress, and a cafe worker, farmers, teachers, school children, and babies, village elders, mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters. This small hamlet found itself in the wrong place at the wrong time, in June of 1944. This region of France is beautiful. Forests, rivers, streams, and dirt roads complete the mosaic. Oradour Sur Glane is that image when you picture a typical French village in the countryside. Those who lived here in early June of 1944 handled their daily affairs as World War II raged in other parts of Europe. Centuries-old Oradour Sur Glane is walkable from one end to the other in 10 minutes. This area had largely escaped the devastation of the current war. The closest German-controlled town in this part of central France was Limoges, roughly 15 miles northwest. Trolley tracks connected Oradour Sur Glane and the town. While it wasn't a battle zone, Oradour Sur Glane was in the middle of French resistance activity in the region. That was one reason why the Germans didn't visit the village too often. The resistance, often referred to in French as the Maquis, wasn't active in Oradour itself, But it was positioned in nearby forests, hills, and larger towns in the region, ready to ambush German troops.
In this village, during the war, there was no resistance. It was nearly like heaven. There were Jewish refugees, Spanish Republican refugees from the Spanish Republican Army who left Spain in 1939. It was a very quiet village, a little village. All these people had a very simple life. They were, most of them, farmers, bakers, pastrymen, their own restaurant, cafe. There was a terrific life in Oradour, a very good football team, and a lot of other things. It was a very lively village, very famous for the church, the very old church from the 12th century.
Each hour, and the enemy's hedgehog defenses are ahead. This is the supreme moment of invasion.
You are about to embark upon the Great Crusade.
Shock troops move in for the beach assault.
The eyes of the world are upon you.
Everything changed in central France when the Allies landed on the Normandy coast, across the English Channel from Great Britain, roughly 300 miles from Oradour Sur Glane.
Operation Overlord, D-Day had happened on June 6, 1944. That gave a boost. The news went across the country really quick. The Allies have landed to the north. Liberation is on its way.
The invasion surged farther inland.
The landing of over 150,000 troops in Normandy potentially meant the beginning of the end of German occupation in France. At least that's what French citizens thought, including those living in tiny Oradour Sur Glane.
For the people in the village, the war was over. The landings had taken place and we didn't think there were any more German troops. So for the people of Oradour, the war was over.
As the Allies gained a foothold in France, the call went out from Allied Supreme Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower for the French resistance to join the fight en masse.
People of Western Europe, the hour of your liberation is approaching. To members of resistance movements, follow the instructions you have received. Great battles lie ahead. Together we shall achieve victory.
German divisions were now headed across Europe to counterattack the landings in Normandy. Resistance units were called on to sabotage their movements. Everything from blowing up bridges and communication lines to ambushing German convoys and killing Nazi officers and troops.
They did significantly help the Allies in defeating fascism. The French resistance actually probably played the most important role in terms of its psychological impact on the French people themselves. The French resistance fought back against occupation and Nazism, and in some cases were very effective, and gave the French, or rather restored, an enormous amount of pride to the French people towards the end of the Second World War. Had there been no French resistance, the French would look back today on a terrible, dark period in their country's history in which many people collaborated, in which they were humiliated, in which terrible stains on their reputation were created. Could we have defeated the Nazis without the French resistance? Absolutely. Were they something of a sideshow? Have people exaggerated their importance? Yes. But nonetheless, there were a lot of very brave people who gave their lives in resisting pure evil, and that's not to be forgotten.
French resistance efforts following D-Day proved to be a significant thorn in the side of German divisions, now driving to the Normandy coast. Central France and the road to Limoges were significant routes for the Germans to get to northwestern France, looking to stop the Allied advance. German generals knew any delays in dealing with the French resistance or partisan activity along the way had to be addressed. In the region around Limoges, the resistance was active, hidden in thick forests and scattered among the villages of France. The threat of ambush was everywhere. German leaders devised a sadistic plan to discourage such activity once and for all. Unfortunately for the quiet village of Oradour Sur Glane, the plan to demoralize and punish the French resistance, or maquis, in June of 1944, involved them.
You must remember Marshal von Rundstedt, who was at the head of the whole German army of occupation in France, sent a warning to the whole SS division and to the Wehrmacht division. Your main job before reaching Normandy is to get rid of all the partisans. If necessary, you can terrorize the population. We don't want any opposition. The 19th century building was in the days of 1944. It was where Heinz Lammerding, the general at the head of the Das Reich, stayed on the 9th of June. And it's in his room that the fate of Oradour was sealed. Lammerding said we have to do something to terrorize this blooming Limousin country. What should we do? Find us a village. And Fayolle, Jean Fayolle, said Oradour, because I can assure you it's a quiet place. There is no maquis, no resistance whatsoever. You will be able to do whatever you like.
The idea was to send a brutal message to the resistance. German leadership decided on an out-of-the-way location where their prey would not expect their arrival. A setting that would not attract attention from the outside world. A place in central France where the resistance would get the cruel message via word of mouth. An area like Oradour, not shaken by war. One of the Germans' top SS commanders, Major Adolf Diekmann, was assigned the task of destroying Oradour Sur Glane by 2nd SS Panzer Division Commander Heinrich Lammerding. Diekmann's close friend in the division, Commander Helmut Kempfe, had recently been captured and executed by the resistance. There had been talk he was being held in Oradour Sur Glane, but that was not true. Plans were finalized in this hotel in Limoges. Diekmann was out for blood and payback. Oradour Sur Glane was circled on the map.
There was an order from the High German headquarters in France: you must crush the French resistance. Do not hesitate to terrorize the population.
How the small village of Oradour Sur Glane became ground zero for retaliation is considered somewhat random. Oradour Sur Glane was certainly the perfect location to send the message to the resistance that civilians would pay the price for the maquis' deadly ambushes. The German 2nd SS Division, also known as the Das Reich, was on its way to Normandy to counterattack, but first they were ordered to deal with the French partisans. The German division had been stationed in the country since the beginning of the year.
By 1944, it's reaching a crescendo, and so is their savagery.
German leadership in this part of France told the 2nd SS Division to quickly deal with the resistance in central France before leaving for Normandy. In the town of Toul, 70 miles southeast of Oradour Sur Glane, partisans and maquis had attacked German troops. German retribution in Toul came on June 7th and 8th. The actions of the 2nd SS Division were swift and deadly.
Toul is very, if I must say something, sadly famous for some massacre from 99 people between 16 and 60. They were arrested one morning, taken as hostages, then hung at the balcony of the houses of the city. We call it the massacre of Tulle.
Word of the Tulle massacre hadn't reached a quiet and peaceful Oradour Sur Glane. On June 10th, just as the unsuspecting residents of the village began to sit down for their midday meal, the German 2nd SS Division arrived.
Saturday the 10th, 1944, it was a school day. It was the medical for the school children. So all the children were still in the school. There was a lot of people who just came here their weekend to fish, to have some clean air. During the war, there was a shortage of tobacco. And Saturday, June the 10th, there was a distribution of cigarettes in Oradour. So obviously, everybody was rushing from all over the places around. So it was like a market day.
On that beautiful June day in 1944, Robert Hebra was relaxing in the hamlet.
On that Saturday, I was happy to have extra time off because we were still working 6 days a week. Like all mechanics, we were pretty much working for the German army. In the afternoon, there was an altercation between my garage supervisor and a German soldier. But I had left early to catch my trolley.
At 2 o'clock, people were finishing their lunches. They were having a glass of wine, they were talking, and suddenly they heard a noise, a rustling noise, coming from the back of the road here. From the entrance, the Limoges, what we call the Limoges entrance, on the road to Limoges.
I went out into the street, and that's when my friend Marshall spotted me. He lived at the top of the village, and we both found ourselves on the side of the road chatting about this and that. We were talking about soccer. And that's when we heard a loud noise. It was a peculiar sound. We saw dust at the turn and 2 tracked vehicles approaching.
The 4th SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment, part of the Das Reich Division, approached the village from the south. The German troops arrived in half-tracks, trucks, and lorries, carrying roughly 200 soldiers.
I was talking here with my friend when we heard a loud noise, and then we looked down at the bend over there. We saw 2 tracked vehicles approaching. I had never seen vehicles like that. They passed in front of us.
Oradour residents, as well as 6 bicyclists who had just happened to be riding through the village that day, had no idea what awaited them.
The people of Oradour were not frightened. They were not worried at all. They say, oh, after all, we are on the road to Normandy. True, we are on the road to Normandy. So it's certainly a division who is going to the Normandy front.
A significant part of the German SS Das Reich Division's plan for Oradour Sur Glane involved keeping all of the people in the village calm.
And there, they saw some German, 5 or 6 half-tracks of German, very, very young, 17, 18.
The Germans' demeanor remained docile as more SS troops filtered into the village under Adolf Diekmann's command.
There were soldiers inside, and since it was 4 days after the D-Day landing, I told my friend, don't worry, they are just heading to Normandy, they are passing by. But then, they stopped at the end of the street.
Oradour was finally sealed off from escape.
The soldiers were spreading out all around the village, and 2 soldiers set out to gather more people. The 2 of us were here talking. I saw some friends over there, and I approached them. There was a soldier with his foot on the curb over there. He had a rifle that was bigger than him. And the pastry chef asked him, "Can I go inside to check? My cakes are going to burn." The soldier replied in French, but with an accent, "Don't worry, we'll take care of it." We did not think there was any danger. We didn't know that the day before, 99 men had been hanged by the same division in Toul.
Around 2 p.m. on a picturesque Saturday, June 10th, 1944, Adolf Diekmann's SS troops began to size up the local population. Where were all the men located in the hamlet? Where could all the women and children be found in Oradour?
Diekmann said, "I want all the population on the main place of Oradour, a bit further up. Women, children, sick people, I don't care, I want all of them. Every people from Oradour must go to the Champ de Foire and must wait."
In the heat of the mid-afternoon, 2nd SS Commander Adolf Diekmann began to implement his plan for Oradour Sur Glane.
The Germans were absolutely quiet. They didn't push us too much as well. And when we were asking them questions, "Why are you taking us?" "Oh, don't worry, it will take only 1 hour." Diekmann said, "Don't worry, you are our hostages, but don't worry, in 1 hour you will be home." Some of them were surrounding the village, so it was impossible by 3 o'clock to escape the village. Totally impossible.
I believed they were going to ask us for our identification papers. I had left my papers at home. I don't live very far away, so I'll go fetch my papers if they ask for them. Nobody thought we were going to die. We were in a group, and I was with my friends talking about what we were going to do on Sunday. When the Nazis arrived, there was already a crowd descending, all people from the village. I joined all the villagers who were there, including my mother and my older sister, because my younger sister was at school. There were already at least 50 people gathered. In the upper part of the village, there was one person who was paralyzed. They killed him in his bed.
None of the roughly 650 people in Oradour Sur Glane, forced to gather that afternoon in the village's main fairground, had any thoughts that they were about to be murdered. However, the tension and agitation level of the German SS troops was undoubtedly rising.
At one point, a soldier approached. He asked for the mayor. The mayor comes forward and the soldier asks him to follow. They went in the direction towards the town hall. And when the mayor came back, he was a bit agitated. He didn't say anything. And then a soldier comes and he says, "There are weapons in the village. We are going to search for them. Those who are not involved will be released." It didn't take long, so not much time passed. We stayed there for at least 3/4 of an hour, talking and moving around. At one point, 3 or 4 soldiers passed through the group. We men were made to stand on the sidewalk here, and the women, they were by the car for a few moments. We still didn't know why the Germans were here. Then the women left. I saw my mother turn around. The soldiers didn't shout. They were very, you can't say courteous, but they were not agitated like you sometimes see in movies where soldiers shout and chase after people. That wasn't the case here. There were no gunshots fired, nothing. Us men were made to stand on the sidewalk here, and we were placed in a rows of 3 facing the wall.
Up to that wall right there?
There were about 70 men, and we were facing the wall. I think they intended to execute us right there on the fairgrounds, but Then they must have thought it would make too much of a mess with the blood and everything.
Around 3 o'clock, Dickman gave an order to separate in several groups the people of Oradour, women and children, men. They take the men and they put them in the garage, in some barns, in some other places. And they told them, just stay like that, and don't worry, this is it. There was no aggressivity from the German.
Teenager Robert Hebra and roughly 190 men in the village were moved to 6 separate barns, sheds, and garages, none within eyesight of each other.
During this time, there are some men to get rid of all the rubbish, to empty the garage, to empty the barns, so they could put the men inside the barns. And they say, now, you go inside, and you stay there. And you stay there.
We sat in the hay because it was hot. There were 3 or 4 of us, and we were talking about soccer.
The German plan to completely wipe the village of Oradour Sur Glane off the map and deliver a message to the resistance was underway.
We had sat down and we saw the SS, Schutzstaffel, setting up their machine guns. There were 2 soldiers with machine guns, 2 soldiers with ammunition belts, and a 5th one who was probably an officer. The officer went around the group, and when he reached our location, he signaled for us to stand up. That's what we did. We stood up.
Behind us, we have the church of Oradour. On that fateful day, the SS took the children and the women into the church. Children between the age of 2 months old to 5, 6 years old. All the school children were taken as well here.
The women had left. I looked to see if I could spot them at the bottom of the village, but there was no one there. They were apparently in the church at the time.
By late afternoon, 450 women and children were now packed into the church under guard. Roughly 200 men were in various other locations around Oradour Sur Glane. That's when the violence in this small French village began.
It was hot. Like everyone else, we sat in the hay and waited. A soldier went around our group. When he reached our location, he signaled to us, so we stood up. By the time he returned to the entrance of the barn, there was a detonation in the village, and the shooting began.
And it was the signal of a massacre. Several German people went to the church. They took a box of explosives with them. They switched it on. They disappeared.
It was a grenade to signal everyone because the execution started. At the same time, soldiers in front of the groups began firing.
The panic must have been incredible.
I found myself under the other men. I'm injured, but not seriously. I don't lose consciousness. The soldiers continued to shoot, so I tried to slip even deeper.
The German SS put the fire on every village. They started to shoot the men. There was 5 survivors.
One of those survivors was teenager Robert Hebra, who ended up buried below the bodies of those shot in his barn.
The shooting stops. Then the soldiers climb onto the bodies, and anyone with a glimmer of life, they finish them off with a shot to the head.
That's another place of killing. The garage. The garage here. You still have an old car in this corner. You still have an old car, you see here. You see, you still have some things. And here we are, another 20 people killed here.
I was covered in a pile of boots, and I continued to hide. I knew my father was outside somewhere, and I was convinced that they had taken their women and children out of the village so they wouldn't witness the execution of the men.
What happened to the 450 women and children driven into the centuries-old church in Oradour Sur Glane is almost beyond description. First, an explosion was set off inside the church, creating a thick cloud of black smoke. That was followed by German machine gun fire and then hand grenades thrown into the house of worship. While this was happening, young Robert Hebra was planning his escape.
They covered everyone with hay, and then the soldiers left. We heard them going away, the sounds of boots getting farther away. So I think to myself, I'll wait here, and at night I'll leave. Back then it got dark at 10:30, so I thought, I'll leave when it gets dark. But they come back. We heard the sound of the boots coming. They came back, and that's when they set fire. There was a ladder, and one of the soldiers climbed up and lit a match to set the logs on fire. He lit one match, then another. When he was on the ladder, I could have touched his helmet, but it was pitch black. They set fire to the hay, and I hear the fire spreading, and then I didn't have a choice anymore. Either I burn alive or I go out and get shot by the soldiers. So I made a quick decision. At that moment, I heard people speaking French, and I could tell they were limousines. I opened the door, and at the back of the stable I saw a shadow, and I was afraid it might be a soldier. But at the time I was scared, so I went out. As I emerged, the soldiers were gone.
Robert Hebra's father managed to evade the tragedy by being a short distance from the village on a work trip. The two would meet up later in the day.
My father had already arrived at my sister's. I explained what had happened. I said, the women must be somewhere. So he took his bicycle, went to Oradour, and went to the church. He saw what had happened. When he came back, he said to me, your mother and your sisters were burned in the church. That's where the real tragedy happened. I'm a bit uncomfortable entering the church. There weren't many bodies because in the church only ashes and bones were found. Visitors can't imagine. I wasn't there, but I can imagine how the women must have agonized when climbing those stairs, entering the church with their babies and strollers. I imagine it wasn't easy. Maybe some soldiers helped them. No one can say.
In the church, there was one woman. She was 52 years old, Madame Roufanche. Beyond the altar in the church, the main altar, there was a window. She broke the window, and she tried to escape through the window, and she did manage. At the same time, there was a poor woman who said, please take my baby with me, 2 months old. The Germans shoot the babies. And this woman will stay 2 days with her 2 legs broken and a few bullets in her body behind the church. Now there was another survivor, Roger Godefrin. He was a little boy of 8 or 9 years old. He was from Lorraine. And his parents have told him, whenever you see the German, please, please, go away, don't approach them. And this little boy went swimming into the river and did escape. The Germans shoot after him, but he did manage to escape. The survivors from the barns, Madame Roufange from the church, and this little boy, Roger Godefrin.
But afterward, when you are together, what happens?
Between the moment when I'm alone and when I came out of the door, I see no one. Then I went back to the bodies in the smoke. I opened the stable door in the back and there's someone who scared me. I quickly closed the door and went to hide in a pigsty. I always wondered. My mom, who walked with difficulty, was sick and had a heart problem. I wonder how she and the others managed to get inside. 450 inside the church. How could they all fit? Because today the church is empty, but back then there were pews, chairs. There were 2 priests in Oradour. There was the town's priest and the Lorraine priest, who was a refugee here. Among the witnesses who survived the tragedy, nobody saw the priest. Yet at the time they were Cossacks, which would have been noticeable. If the priests had been in the church, they would have led prayers. They would have asked the women and children to pray.
Of the 643 residents of Oradour Sur Glane who are now dead, 247 of them were women, and another 205 were children. All those dead in the church were burned beyond recognition, thanks to the ensuing fire that raged. Robert Hebrau's mother and 2 sisters were among the dead.
The Oradour massacre on June 10th, 1944. I believe that when the Dash Reich unit went into Oradour Sur Glane, there's other stuff going around. There's the kidnapping of a major and the search for weapons and all this and that. But I think at the end, the real message of exterminating 643 innocent lives in a few hours on June 10th, 1944, was to basically terrorize the Maquis and say, look, I'm still king of the castle here. It's not because we've got a bunch of guys to the north that landed that we ain't gonna win this one. And I think that sent a shockwave across that region, the Maquis to the north, the Maquis to the south, the west and east, and you got this thing, Oradour, that happens in the middle. And all of a sudden you just created this fear. And I think it was really to mark a point.
Oradour Sur Glane.
Dickman was annoyed, and I think he did his job so well because he was thinking of his friend, Major Kampf, who was kidnapped. He was really annoyed, so he wanted to do the job better than normal, killing more people than normal.
And I think it's just a statement. Unfortunately, it's a statement that cost lives.
What did happen during the night of the 10th to the 11th? Some SS went back to their barracks. Some of us went to Limoges to have some fun. Some of us, 10 of them, stayed into Oradour. They stayed into Oradour. And they drank. They drank all the bottle they could find.
On the night of June 10th, sometime after 6 p.m., the village was looted and lit on fire by soldiers of the German 2nd SS Division.
The next day, I went back to my sister's place. And that's where I learned from my father that they had killed the women and children in the church. It was so painful that I don't even remember the week that followed. I don't recall anything that happened.
Following the massacre, residents and aid workers from the region flocked to Oradour Sur Glane looking for their children and family. What they found was the smell of burnt flesh, bodies torn to shreds from bullets, and a village burned to the ground. This was an atrocity on such a scale it could not be hidden, even though the SS made attempts to bury as many bodies as possible before heading on to Normandy.
The day after Oradour, a German plane came over Oradour to check. The SS had one order: you must bury as many people as possible. So they dig some holes, and they put the body inside it. This is the thing. They took photos for one good reason: to have some proofs, to have some evidence. Because De Gaulle said, and even Churchill, these people who did that, they will be tried after the war as war criminals. So they needed some photos. A charred body, without legs, without head sometimes, remains of children as well, especially in the church. You couldn't recognize anybody in the church, anybody at all. It was a terrible massacre.
Does any visitor to Oradour really comprehend what could have happened in the church? Those approximately 450 women and children who were in the church. Otherwise, there would have only been the deaths of the men, and the village would have remained. We would have carried on. But for me, the real tragedy is in the church.
Visiting Oradour Sur Glane today is to witness the results of mass murder. Civilians caught up in war. The intensity of evil. The importance of remembrance and preservation. The power of education.
Historians have spent a lot of time detailing what happened there, but the horror of it is what came to me. The details were certainly important, but the mood of that place struck many of us as we walked those grounds. I think the place where I pretty much lost it was going up to where the memorial is, and encased in glass, human remains, and what looked like a child's hand. That was the tough part. That was the real part.
Oradour Sur Glane villager Robert Hebra, a survivor, is too aware of this story.
Now they call me a survivor, the one who made it. I am. That's it. I am a man. I am a witness. I am a witness.
Je suis un témoin.
For Hebra, it is difficult to walk down these streets where his family and friends were murdered. Unlike June 10th, 1944, there are no screams today, just silence. Decades later, everything remains familiar to Robert.
The opening there is quite large. What was it?
It used to be a grocery store.
Ah, I see. So it had a storefront.
There was the kitchen at the back over there, and there were 2 bedrooms on the 2nd floor.
Is this your bed?
Yes, that's my bed. Before my little sister was born, I used to sleep there. There was a wardrobe where my mother used to hide chocolate. Sometimes I would sneak in and cut a piece of chocolate. She noticed it, but she didn't say anything. And behind it, there was a storage area where we kept wood. And since we heated with wood, my father had to buy wood. We would unload it here. Then we had to take it in the wheelbarrow and put it in the storage areas. And there were 1 or 2 rabbits and 1 or 2 chickens.
"643 residents of Oradour Sur Glane were dead. Their faces are forever frozen in time."
You have the pictures of all these people. You can see old people, you can see women, you can see babies. Babies, even babies were killed here by the Germans. What struck me the most about Oradour, it's what was left of it, which we called in Limousin the ghost of Oradour. Objects. Look at that, a sewing machine. It was a one merchant here. About 20 men were shot here, in this place. You can see that this village was stopped in its life.
Some villagers who were murdered by members of the 4th Grenadier Regiment of the 2nd SS Division on June 10, 1944, are buried in the local Oradour Sur Glane cemetery. Only 52 of the 643 residents slaughtered were able to be officially identified. Faces on headstones and memorials represent the rest. Other very personal reminders of the violence that occurred here are also exposed. Life in a small village before the Germans arrived. The mechanic's garage. The baker's oven. A sewing machine. A school. And an empty church. The reason why Oradour Sur Glane was ultimately chosen to be destroyed has been debated ever since June 10, 1944.
The Germans had retribution, and the way they lashed out is to the populace, indicates that. I think that many of them, especially the officers, had a good idea, we're losing this war. But they had a job to do too, and that's the horrific murders that take place en masse is only a reflection of that.
What is certain is that Robert Hebras' French village experienced cruel and savage personal violence seldom seen in World War II, except on the Russian front. Oradour Sur Glane was a war crime.
Oradour stands as an Auschwitz, as a Dachau in France. And I think everybody should visit it at least once just to know what horror war can be.
Walking around the skeletal remains of a town, seeing glimpses of human beings being there, like a sewing machine, a burnt-out car, an anvil, a shovel, was all, to me, it was a reminder that human beings were once here, had lives, had dreams, had futures, and all lost in a morning when the Nazis showed up.
It's a place I don't like. I don't like going in there. I feel the dread already. I get emotional, I get shivers. I'm a dad, and seeing the pictures of those children throws me into a loop. I can't believe human beings could do that to each other. And I think that for General Charles De Gaulle to preserve that town the way it is preserved was brilliant, in that you can't deny it. It is a memorial, it is a statement to say never again.
Today, the old Oradour Sur Glane of 1944 lives on as a ghost village, uninhabited and within eyesight of a modern version of the rural community rebuilt after the war. The past is always visible to those in the present. The message is always within eyesight in the old rural French hamlet of Oradour Sur Glane. History like this should never repeat itself.
Marie Avril, Françoise Bertrand, Gisèle Laine, Jean Senon, Pierre Dupic, Marcel Petit, Janie Girard, Denis Mercier, François Mercier, Marguerite Barato, Olga Lacroix, Daniel Gaillot, Hubert Gaillot, Daniel Bardet.